Okay, to start off, do you have a specific favorite horror movie, and if so, what do you think makes that your favorite?
I've got two favourite horror films. Um, it's John Carpenter's Halloween and George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. And again, these are films that were made in 1978, so they're quite old. They've both been remade since. I won't go into what I thought of the remakes, but what it is I like about the films, I don't know, as I said, there's something about that era where I like the setting. I like the fact that you can watch these films today, and they'll still be as effective. Um, what else is there? I mean, yeah, I mean, to an extent, again, one of the reasons I suppose why they've been remade is some people might think that, well, they were successful to begin with for whatever reason. I mean, obviously, if they were successful enough to be remade, that means it wasn't, there wasn't a particular sort of one thing you can say this is why it was successful. I mean, they're both horror classics. I mean, Carpenter's Halloween was one of the key early slasher films. It wasn't the first slasher film, but it was one of the ones that set up your Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, the Scream series. So Halloween was one of those sort of early examples. Dawn of the Dead, well, I mean, before sort of it became sort of zombie overkill where everything's got zombies in it today. It was just a unique zombie film. Again, it was a sequel to, well, it wasn't a sequel, but it followed on from a classic, the original Night of the Living Dead, which again is seen as another horror classic. And I just like the idea of people just being locked up in a shopping centre and just going around taking what they want off the shelves. Yeah, I mean, there's no one thing in particular. It's just they're both horror classics, and I just happen to like them.
Um, a lot of movies are praised for certain aspects like the script or special effects. As a horror movie, what aspects do you think are most important when creating it?
Oh, that is a good question. I mean, a script, you've got to have a strong script, again, no matter what film you're making. You've got to have characters that, bearing in mind with horror films, this is something else that you guys might want to consider. The unique thing about horror films, horror films in particular, this is why I love watching them, is that they will evoke, that's what I'm looking for, emotions in the audience that no other film does. Okay, so it's not like, a comedy film will make you laugh or a drama will make you sad, whatever. Horror films are the only films that you'll be watching, you'll be thinking, what is going to happen? Fear, yeah? And one of the key things you need to get right in order for it to be successful is, I already mentioned the script, the story, the characters. You've got to want the audience to care about the characters. Yeah, to relate to the characters in some way and put themselves in that situation. What would I do if that was me? Whereas, as I said, there's a lot of horror films out there where they not really pay much to character development. Unfortunately, one of the things with modern horror films is they just like to make a quick buck, so they don't even care about the characters themselves that they create. And you're just sitting there watching it and you're just thinking, someone just sort of cut this person up to pieces and let's get this film over with.
Okay. Due to the brief we've been given, there's certain limitations like we can't include too much gore or too much profanity. Do you think it's still possible to make a effective horror without them aspects?
Yeah, definitely. Again, I can give you a list of horror films that are classics and there's very little gore or violence or profanity in them. I already mentioned John Carpenter's Halloween. As I said, it's one of my favourite films. Barely any violence in there. Psycho, again, it's going a bit further back. Hardly any violence in there. Blair Witch Project, as I said, you don't even see it's just people running around in the dark woods screaming. No violence in there. It's certainly possible. And in fact, it's probably more effective. And again, from my experience, because obviously I've made a few short horror films in my time as well, And the key thing is make the audience fill in the gaps. You know, if there's something you can't show, like violence, or some violent act happening, suggest it to them and let them fill in the gaps. That's actually more effective, because the audience automatically thinks worst case scenario. You know, what is the most horrific thing I can imagine is happening off screen here? I don't know if you guys have seen, and this isn't a horror film, but have you guys seen Reservoir Dogs? Tarantino film.
No.
Right, it's gangster. Well, it's basically a heist movie. Yeah, group of guys go rob a bank, and then they all go into this warehouse, and then you see how it all unfolds. And there's a very famous scene in that film where there's a policeman tied up, he's being tortured, and by this maniac with one of these sort of straight razors, and he goes to cut off the policeman's ear, and the camera moves away, and all you hear is some muffled sound. And it's actually, I remember watching that the first time, I was just wincing, because I was imagining it, I was imagining what was happening off screen rather than being shown it. So I was putting, in my mind, I was painting the worst possible picture of that scene, what was happening. So again, that can be really effective. The less you show to the audience, might even be, might be better.
Okay. Finally, you've mentioned some techniques, but are there any specific techniques like use of lighting or effects that enhance the experience of a horror film?
Again, it depends on the horror film. If you've got like a supernatural movie set in a haunted house, it's all about lighting and sound even. You look at films like the original The Haunting. It's quite a dark film, and a lot of it is to do with the sound design. And then you've got other films, another, a very, very modern, successful horror film. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It Follows. Have you seen that? No. Okay, but it's set in broad daylight. Yeah, one of the, a lot of the scenes are out in the street, in broad daylight, in public. There's not really much technique going on in terms of, lighting or sound or whatever. It's just the camera's set up, and whatever's happening is happening. So it depends on the type of horror film you want to make. I don't want you guys thinking, right, we're making a horror film, and that's it. It's like, well, what type of horror film are you going to make? What kind of story are you going to have? What characters are you going to have? What monster are you going to have? There's no, right, okay, we're making a horror film, let's take out the identikit, make horror film by numbers. It's not as easy as that. So it depends. I mean, if I can ask you a question, what kind of horror film are you thinking of doing?
Due to the brief provided, we're probably going to focus on the killer clown craze that was going on.
Right.
It will be kind of a trapped in a room kind of thing, like he's in one big area being hunted. That's pretty much it. We do incorporate a little bit of violence, but not too much due to the brief, and if possible, some comedy.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
So with that, I'd say techniques you might want to consider, and again, off sort of those types of films I've seen before, it will be, if it's all, first of all, it's indoors, okay? So you need to consider your lighting, yeah? If it's indoors and it's all, did you say it's all in a room?
It's several larger rooms. Like we can use the college possibly as location.
Okay. So think of your lighting, camera angles, because obviously with a horror film you want to make the audience feel uncomfortable. So you want to make them feel, especially if it's indoors, make them feel claustrophobic, like there's not much room to move around in. So I would say for that kind of film, those are the sort of techniques you want to consider. Yeah, the lighting, camera angles, I mean even the editing as well. But yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
I do like that.